to the Happy Lawyer Project. I'm your host, Akoma Moronu, and I created this show to help lawyers find happiness in life with a law degree. Together with my guests, we provide the knowledge, insight, skills, inspiration, and encouragement you need to find your happy. On today's show, I chat with a marijuana lawyer. As most of you know, marijuana has become such a dynamic and rapidly changing industry. And as the industry grows, so will the legal services needed to support it. There's lots of new shops opening up across the country to support this growing industry. But I really wanted to get someone on who knew her stuff. And Lauren Davis was so gracious to agree to join me on the show. Lauren has been in Colorado practicing in marijuana law since before it was legalized as a recreational drug. On today's show, she shares her story of getting into the industry and what it's like to work in a legal gray space. She offers some advice for young lawyers considering diving in and her predictions for the future of the industry under Trump. I hope you guys enjoy. Welcome to the Happy Lawyer Project, Lauren. I'm super excited to have you on today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So it would be great if you could just start with a brief description of who you are and what you do.
Oh, who I am in a 30-minute podcast? I am a pretty outdoorsy, fun, carpe diem lady who happens to play lawyer by day. What I do is I have a boutique law practice in Colorado that focuses on most issues related to Colorado's marijuana laws. So everything from the Constitution to the business and regulatory side to criminal defense, sort of all things marijuana law on state law issues related.
That's so fascinating, and I'm really excited to dive into more of that. But before we get started talking about marijuana law specifically, I'd be interested in knowing how you made the decision to move to Colorado and enter the field.
So I ended up in New York City for law school, and as great as New York is in a lot of ways, I've never really wanted to be there. Just, how do you say no to one of the top law schools in the country? So I made a vow to myself that I wasn't going to stay in New York. And of course, then I got a clerkship for the New Jersey Supreme Court, which I stayed in the city. And then I worked at the Manhattan DA's office, which, how do you turn down an opportunity like that? But it's an unbelievably amazing job, as cool as it is on the 27 TV shows about it. But I just made a vow to myself that lifestyle was the most important thing to me. And I wanted to be in the mountains. I wanted to be somewhere that had a city and culture, and Denver was just the perfect place for me. I've been here 14 years when it was still considered a cow town.
And how did you pick Denver? Are you originally from Denver or?
No, so for the Manhattan DA's office, I had to make a 3-year commitment. And in the time, it was between Denver and San Francisco. And in the interim, my oldest brother moved to Denver. And so to be in our family, it became a done deal.
Okay. So that makes sense, the Denver part. So what about the marijuana part?
So the marijuana part was, I call it my accidental coming out party. So, I was a prosecutor in New York City, and then I was a prosecutor in Denver for 6.5 years. And before that, like I said, I clerked, I'd worked on Capitol Hill. And so it was sort of this perfect storm, right place, right time of my passions, my experiences. Basically, keep a long story somewhat short, I ended up attending this public hearing back in 2009 that was going to change the face of Colorado's marijuana laws and open it up for dispensaries. And this is before the state was acting on the legislation. This was a public hearing deciding if they were going to limit the number of patients a caregiver could care for. And so I ended up being asked by some of the opponents to the measure. They're trying to limit it to 5 patients per caregiver. I was seated time. Somebody asked me to speak. I was like, what? I don't know anything about marijuana law. So I ended up speaking against the measure and really in opposition to what law enforcement was saying. It was soon enough from law enforcement that I had credibility on the topic. And really, the arguments law enforcement were making, when taken to their logical conclusion, were going to produce the opposite result of what they were arguing for. And so, anyway, of the hundreds of people who spoke that day, I ended up quoted in the Denver Post. And so it was sort of my accidental coming out party.
That's amazing. I love that story because I'm going to butcher this quote, but I think it's a Steve Jobs quote that says that you can only connect the dots looking backwards. And there's no way you could have planned that.
No. I mean, I worked on Capitol Hill because I was this policy nerd and was, didn't understand at all what politics was really about. I was all bright, shiny, thought I could affect change, and wasn't interested once I actually watched the sausage making process. And then, clerked for the New Jersey Supreme Court, so dealt with constitutional and appellate law issues. And when I started this in Colorado, when I started practicing marijuana law, that was all that was there, was the Constitution. There were no statewide regulations. Local municipalities didn't have rules and regulations. And so it was really making it up as we went along. And then in 2010, in July 2010 is when the state law went into effect that actually created a regulatory licensing scheme and allowed people to start getting licenses to have legitimate businesses.
Okay, so let's go back really quickly to the Denver Post quote. So you get quoted, and then what? People just start calling you? Or I guess what's the transition look like between that quote and...
at the end of the hearing, all these people were coming up to me, wanted my business card, started getting phone calls. And then I had started working as co-counsel with somebody who had been prominent at the time. And I just ended up with way more work than one person should have, and, just took off from there.
So that's a really good transition into kind of what you were saying previously about how lifestyle has always been a priority to you, which is why New York wasn't going to be a great fit. What does your lifestyle look like now? I know that you've managed to establish some degree of work-life balance, running your own firm, doing what you do. So could you share a little bit of what that looks like?
So work-life balance for me is being active, getting outside in Mother Nature, seeing my friends, my family, those have to have some priority, because being a lawyer, no matter if you work for yourself, a firm, etc., there's always work to be done, and you could spend every minute of every day working. So, it's really, you got to sometimes tear yourself away and remember that you matter, your happiness matters, and back away from the work, it'll be there tomorrow. But my day, I'd say day to day is always different in terms of the work that we're actually doing. We do everything from somebody has an idea about something related to marijuana. I mean, it could be a service to the marijuana industry. It could be directly engaging in the buying, selling, growing, of marijuana, being used products market. And so we help people really develop their business ideas and tweak the ideas to make them legally compliant under Colorado law. And then, drafting documents from corporate formation, entity choice, to shareholders agreements or operating agreements. Once the company's set up, okay, now you need a lease for a space. So reviewing leases down to regulatory compliance issues once they get fully licensed. So every day is something different. And on top of it, I still do criminal cases. I feel like if I'm not in court hearing how judges are interpreting these laws, what you're putting on paper isn't worth the paper it's written on. I recently had a case where I had one of the drafters of Amendment 64, which is the Colorado recreational law, in court to testify about what they meant. And the judge didn't want to hear it and ruled the exact opposite way of what the drafters of the actual constitutional amendment meant. And so if you're not in court fighting that out, you don't know that that's what judges think. And so trial work is a a love-hate relationship, but I feel like I really need to stay in that part of the game. Otherwise, like I said, what I'm putting on paper is worthless. Because at the end of the day, if there's a dispute or there's a question, it's how a judge is going to interpret these things.
What you're saying logically makes so much sense to me, but coming from a big law background where the people I work with are so niched in their practice, it's so fascinating for me to hear kind of somebody who has a full service practice and takes their clients through the entire life cycle of their business from incorporation to, worst case scenario down the road.
Yeah.
I guess I'd be interested in knowing how you made that transition into transactional kind of corporate work.
Well, so I'm super lucky. I forget if it's fourth or fifth generation lawyer. So my dad was, like you're describing, he was a dinosaur where he was a general practitioner. And, he was the attorney for some town zoning boards. He did a lot of real estate transactional work and small business transactional work. And so, he has really been my mentor and my teacher in terms of drafting documents, things to look for. And then obviously the regulatory compliance issues, since I've quote unquote grown up with the system. In other words, like I was in marijuana law before the Colorado Marijuana Enforcement Division was created, or, even an inkling in a legislator's eye. I am very lucky to have a really good grasp of the compliance issues. So, and what the rules mean and what's required. So, really it's, there's definitely a lot of self-education that has gone on, and it's definitely been a work in progress. When I look at some of the documents that I drafted back in 2009 versus what would pass today, the legal game has definitely stepped it up in the marijuana business. It's definitely getting more complex. Now, that said, I don't deal with everything. I'm smart enough to know you are entering into territory that deals with SEC issues. Here's an SEC attorney to go talk to. Or, I don't give tax compliance advice, although I do have an associate who has an LLM in taxation. But, really working with the accountants on how they want it structured and making sure they're reviewing operating agreement provisions, even though a lot of attorneys would say, oh, this is just boilerplate, put it in, because of 280E, which is the federal tax code provision that does not allow marijuana businesses to take normal business deductions. They really need to get into that level of planning in advance. And so I do work with other professionals when it's areas outside
your scope of expertise, I suppose.
That's the part you're going to cut out. When you work with, I work with people who bring important specialties to the drafting table, or make sure that they have reviewed the part that is applicable to that side of things, to help clients structure their businesses correctly, with the best tax advantages, considering 280E, there aren't many. But so really, I would say, my dad is my mentor, and then being smart goes a very long way. And again, to me, a lot of it goes back to the litigation, because when I'm drafting agreements, I'm really looking at it from a litigator's perspective. People who are drafting from the transactional side, I feel like a lot of times, there's certain boilerplate and things that have to be in there, and you want to capture what the parties want in the agreement. But at the end of the day, I'm looking at it perhaps for some different purposes, the regulatory side of things. And the ultimate issue in the document drafting is, how do you protect the licenses? So forget if member A does something wrong and has to be removed, he's no longer qualified to hold a license. If you don't have provisions in there and haven't thought through the issues that come up on the compliance side, and how the companies can get in trouble or individual members can get in trouble, normal business document drafting has some place in the marijuana document drafting world, but there's a lot of other provisions that I think you need a really well-rounded understanding of the regulatory and compliance issues, the criminal issues, et cetera, to make sure at the end of the day, the licenses that are worth a lot of money stay intact. So it really, to me, especially given that we're working in an area that's federally illegal, although in Colorado it is legal for lawyers to advise and help clients with Colorado marijuana law issues. But given the fact that it is federally illegal, the criminal background to me is a really critical part of what I bring to the table.
I think that one of the key things that you said that really stuck out to me is the fact that it's important both to be able to learn and to know when you don't know. And I think that a lot of lawyers really struggle with that because they don't know when it's something they should just kind of buckle down and learn and when it's something they should delegate.
No, and I have zero problem and think it is the ethical, honest thing to do when I see an issue. Instead of me learning it, I'm going to bring in somebody where that's their area of expertise. So, a client is looking to purchase a parcel of property that he wants to grow on. In Colorado, water rights are a very big issue and very complicated. I wouldn't touch it with a 50-foot pole. What I want to make sure is, does the client have water rights? Either way, you either need a water rights lawyer to review that water deed, or you need to go hire one to figure out how to get your water rights here. But I'm not going to touch it. I think one of the best things a professor in law school taught us, trying to teach us the rule against perpetuities, and he basically only cared that we understood enough to issue spot the issue and know to refer it to an expert.
That's a good professor.
That was literally the extent of what I learned about the rule against perpetuities in law school.
That is unbelievably practical advice coming from a law school professor.
Yeah, I mean, and, my clients have a lot of respect when I say, okay, look, it sounds like you are treading into something that is SEC territory. You got to go talk to an SEC expert. There is more than enough work to go around. I have no problem admitting what I don't know and what I think it would be malpractice for me to even try to learn about. Learning about a refresher on different types of delivery contracts and clauses in terms of shifting risk and that sort of thing. You can refresh your memory and learn enough to draft a contract for a client. There are some issues, it's still just an agreement between the parties, meeting of the minds. But there are some issues that I think it is malpractice and irresponsible for an attorney to do if it's not within their area of expertise or it's that specialized.
I think that's great advice no matter what area of law you're practicing and no matter what level you're at, is know when to ask for help. And that's not just kind of a competent, good judgment call, but it's the ethical call for the client. So,
yeah, and it makes me sad when I see or hear about attorneys who don't have, just where they are at in their careers, they don't have enough experience with a particular area they should be referring it out. And I don't know if it's pride or if it's just the greed for the buck, but it gives attorneys a bad name, and it's really sad for the client. And it's, while we're not physicians, we are doctors of the law, and it should still be the do no harm mentality.
Absolutely. So I would be interested to transition a little bit because you mentioned that there's lots of work, plenty of work to go around. And I know that I would be lying if it wasn't like at least once a month that somebody approaches me and says, I'm thinking of just going into marijuana law, especially with kind of all the changes in the law this year. So what would your advice be to lawyers who are intrigued by the practice and wondering whether it's a viable option for them?
So I think my advice depends on what stage of their career they're at. For somebody who is just starting out as a lawyer, I honestly think that you need to get experience and get a more well-rounded experience in some area of the law. So, if you want to ultimately be a marijuana litigator, go work at a litigation practice where you're learning from mentors. If you want to be in a transactional practice, again, it doesn't matter what types of documents you're drafting. I think to really learn well, you need to digest and get some skills under your belt. Again, I didn't come into marijuana law until I was 15 years into my career, even though the transactional side was something relatively new. I still had been a lawyer for 15 years. So for the people just starting out, I think it's, unless you're lucky enough to get in a marijuana law firm, I think it's really more important to get good legal skills under your belt. For attorneys who are already in the practice, do it. But first check with an ethics attorney in whatever state you practice in. Before I went into marijuana law, I hired an ethics attorney and discussed what risks I was taking and what I was embarking on. I mean, like I said, Colorado has a rule that allows attorneys to practice without making it unethical. But a lot of states have rules where working in marijuana law is a violation of your state ethics rules. And, I met with somebody prestigious enough who was in the know enough in terms of this, ethics committee, et cetera, that I felt pretty comfortable that short of committing that regular malpractice, it wasn't the topic of marijuana, given the Colorado laws, was not, at the time it was Amendment 20, constitutional right. A lawyer has to be able to advise people about their constitutional rights. So I wasn't super concerned, but not every state has taken that position. So for everybody, go pay another attorney who specializes in your state's ethics issues to have a heart-to-heart with you. And then you can make an informed decision.
So without getting too political, I'd be interested in knowing your thoughts on kind of the future of marijuana law, given the current administration's position, and if you have any concerns about the future of its legality.
The bottom line is that the administration is totally out of line with the will of the majority of U.S. citizens, especially on the topic of medical marijuana. And I am largely on the topic of recreational as well, but I predict that in future years, the recreational side, people's opinions are going to come around. That said, whether maybe I am just being ridiculously optimistic, but, the administration's position shouldn't even really be the beginning or the end of the discussion at this point. It's Congress can change the scheduling of marijuana and create rules about its enforcement and states' rights, which is what the administration touted before it was elected, states' rights. So leave it to the states, and Congress can very easily put the whole discussion to bed. So I see it as a chess game. There's now there is now a congressional cannabis caucus. There are things going on at the federal level, and I think possibly the administration's position could be what Congress needs to move it to action. As far as the states, in the 9 states where marijuana is recreationally legal and it's taxed to high heaven, states have relied on this for their budget. And the amount of money coming in to the states' coffers, I think, is going to push the states' rights arguments further. And I'm also still not entirely clear, is this Jeff Sessions' position on marijuana, or is it really the administration's position? So I am blindly optimistic, but I think the horse is out of the barn.
I completely share your optimism because I think there are certain things that you can't put back in the box, and this may be one of them, but I guess only time will tell. I have so much enjoyed chatting with you, and it's clear that you are an expert in what you do and that you've had some really great mentors along the way. So I think it'd be really helpful if you could share some resources maybe that you've used that you found helpful along your journey and in your practice.
Oh, other attorneys, attending conferences with attorneys in your specialty. You are great networking opportunities, but also great ways to find those experts that we're talking about who have a passion about their area of law, water rights attorneys, SEC attorneys. Most of the conferences I go to this point are national organizations for reforming marijuana laws, Colorado Criminal Defense Bar, but you will meet people from different parts of the state, different parts of different practice areas or different specialties. And those are some of the best resources. Oh, and a lot of those organizations will have listservs. So getting on listservs is, I would say, one of the best ways to stay up on changes in case law, cases on appeal. I have found that on these listservs, attorneys are super helpful to each other, and it's one of the nicest interactions I see between attorneys.
So on conferences, because I hear this a lot, and I love conferences, but when I tell other lawyers, like young lawyers who are just starting out and trying to figure out what they want to do to go to conferences, they don't quite get it. Do you have any tips for how to make the most of a conference or to pick a conference?
Well, I think first you need to decide, are you there for the learning or are you there for the partying? So in my experience, at least all the conferences I've been to, there's a large party element. And, a lot of them, if you're going to go to Hawaii or you're going to come out to Vail, a lot of people book their conferences with the plan of signing in, going out to ski, and getting the CLE credit for it. And that's great, but at least show up to some of the talks that interest you and go to the mixers. I've never been to a conference where people aren't going out for a drink or meeting up at some restaurant or bar. Be present at that. You meet a lot of really interesting people I've gotten calls from attorneys that I've met at conferences. They live in California. They have a client who wants to come start a business in Colorado. I've referred things out to attorneys across the country. It is a great way to meet people, and not every lecture at the conference is going to be relevant or interesting. Pick some. I think one of the things is it's easy to get burned out in a whole day conference. So if you need your time on the Hill or whatever else you want to do there, at least pick a couple of sessions that you can actually focus and pay attention at, because even if you're not necessarily feeling like you're learning, it's not relevant to you in the moment, it could become relevant to you down the road.
I think that's great advice. I think being engaged and kind of partaking in all the aspects is really important. So I think that's great advice. What is the best way for people to follow you and learn more about what you do?
So it's the law office of Lauren C. Davis, and we have a Facebook page where myself and my associates will post different news articles, like Colorado made $14 trillion in taxes this month, things going on the federal level, those sorts of issues. So you can find us on Facebook or www.laurendavislaw.com.
Fantastic. I'm excited to share your information with, as I said, I know so many people who are so interested in getting to marijuana law or who have a friend who's looking for somebody. And so I'll definitely be passing your information along. And unfortunately, we are so close to time, and I would just love if you could answer my very last question for today. And I ask everybody who comes on the show this question, so I'd be interested to know what you think separates happy lawyers from those lawyers who struggle to find happiness in life with a law degree?
I think it's really that their personality and interests are a good match for the practice area that they've chosen, and that they like what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. I mean, it's a job. It's not called play for a reason. It's a job. But I think if you are somebody who loves numbers, then find a practice area that gives you around a lot of numbers. If you don't like to talk to people, maybe appellate law is for you. But I think you really need to match your personality and what mentally stimulates and excites you with the area that you focus on. So to me, it's the match between your personality and interests and your practice area. But I can't wait to hear all the other answers you've gotten.
I think that's a great answer. And I think, it kind of speaks to being in alignment with who you are and what you do. And a lot of lawyers, I don't know, have done kind of the exercise of figuring out what they like to do. They just know what they're good at doing. And often that's school and, just meeting other people's expectations. So I think the first step is to know what you like to do and then figure out how to match that. Because there's lots of options. No, I was just going to say there's lots of options in the law. There's as you were saying, there's different ways to practice. And you kind of have to know first that there are lots of options. So you have to know what you're looking for and not just kind of fall into something based on being good at it.
Right. I mean, even in school, some people really like algebra. Some people really like reading Shakespeare. So figure out there's something, like you said, there's something for everybody in the practice of law. But just because you're good at it, if it's not making you happy, I'm pretty sure that you go after something that makes you happy, you're going to be even better at it.
It seems simple, right? If it makes you happy and you do it, you'll be happy.
Well, and I also think it's being in an atmosphere with people who share your values on work-life balance. And, you work at a big law firm. It doesn't have to be across the entire organization. You can't put that many people, especially opinionated lawyers, in one place and expect it to be a party all the time or for everybody to love each other. But as long as your practice group and the people you're interacting with on a daily basis or most of your time at work are people who share your outlook or that you enjoy being around, that tremendously adds to work happiness.
Agreed. Thank you so much for coming on today and sharing so much about marijuana law with my guests and with me. I look forward to hearing what people have to say.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and I super appreciate it.
Thank you for joining me for the Happy Lawyer Project podcast. Please head over to my website, www.thehappylawyerproject.com, for more information from today's show. While you're there, I'd love it if you'd leave me your thoughts on the show. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn, Facebook, or follow me on Instagram. If you've enjoyed the show, please share it with your friends. And don't forget to head over to iTunes to subscribe and review the show. As you know, each rating helps more listeners find the show and helps me get awesome guests on here for you guys. If there's anyone you'd like me to have on the show, or if you'd like to be on the show, head over to my website and let me know, or send me an email at Okoma, OKEOMA, @thehappylawyerproject.com. A special thanks to everyone who's left a review, sent me an email, or reached out to me in any way. I appreciate you. Thank you again for spending this time with me, and if you would like to learn more about working in your gift and living your passion, head over to the website for a free gift. Until next time, bye!